Hey guys, I'm here with another passage. It's shorter passage this time, not as long as the previous one. There are a few questions, the usual drill, right? I'm pretty sure by now you guys are pretty used to it. You can pause the video and solve it for yourself. This is the first slide. This is second slide. This is the passage, okay? And this is question number 1. This is question number 2, and this is question number 3. Okay, that's pretty much it. This is typically in the same mold as passages in 2017 in terms of the length. Okay, it's like pretty short passages with 3 questions. However, this one's slightly dense in terms of the content. Okay, it's not as easy as the 2017 CAT passages. Slightly dense, not very difficult. The diction is pretty okay. The subject could be a tad not so entertaining. I mean, but then okay, the whole concept of entertainment should not exist when it comes to CAT preparation. Okay. Anyways, without further ado, we'll just jump into the passage. If you're solving it, it should, ideally speaking, the average 99 percentiler. There's nothing average about 99 percentile, but the average 99 percentiler should be done with this particular exercise, reading and the 3 questions in under 5 minutes. Okay. And if you're someone's looking to clear the cutoff, if you want to be somewhere around that cutoff range, this will end up at this juncture probably take you 8 to 9 minutes. Even 10 minutes is cool because it's still going to prepare for like 4-5 months, right? But if this is taking more than 10 minutes for you, that means that you need quite a bit of work. Okay, it means that you're lagging quite a bit. You shouldn't be taking more than 10 minutes. Anyway, let's look at the passage. A policy level change for which some now argue is to reduce or eliminate the intellectual property protection of medical interventions. Okay, watch out for filler expressions like these. They're pretty useless. Okay, you just end up wasting your time between 2 commas. As a reader, you don't want to pay attention to this because you always want to focus on what's the main idea in the passage, right? So a policy level change is, what is a policy level change that people want? Reduce or eliminate the intellectual property protection of medical interventions, which means that it should be available more freely and not that some pharma companies hold whatever they have created. This would have several consequences. Okay, it would obviously mitigate the financial incentives that appear to be corrupting medical science. The moment you come across this word, okay, this is a very strong negative word, you know where the author lies. These are the kind of words, adjectives and adverbs, obviously, if you're looking in terms of grammar, but these are the kind of words that generally tell you what the author's stance is. Okay, the tone of the passage is always hidden in adjectives and adverbs. So the author is saying that this particular the policy level change is the policy level change suggestion is to eliminate intellectual property protection. This would have consequences. It will mitigate, meaning reduce, the financial incentives that appear to be corrupting medical science. Whatever is corrupting medical science, that will be reduced, meaning something that is bad is being reduced, which means that something good is coming out of it, which means the author's stance is that he or she is in favor of the policy change. Okay, in favor of eliminating the intellectual property protection. That's what you know about the author already. Okay, these are the kind of equations that you should be solving before you go further on this stuff. That you should actually, it's not that you stop and analyze it to this extent. This is something that you should understand even as you read. Okay, the moment you see corrupting medical science, you're like, okay, fine, this is what the author wants, right? So the author is not in favor of the financial incentives. Therefore, the author is not in favor of intellectual property protection of these interventions. Therefore, the author is in favor of policy level change to eliminate them. Okay. Certainly, the antics of people such as Martin Shelley would be impossible. Now, this is a useless sentence because you don't know who this guy is. General knowledge is not really important for us when it comes to solving RC passages. But you know that this guy is someone the author doesn't like, probably a crook, probably someone who's benefited from intellectual property protection of medical interventions. Okay, Google it. It's a very interesting controversy. Anyways, would it also mean that there would be less innovative medical research and development? Okay, so the tone, right? The author is asking you a question here. Would it also mean that there would be less innovative medical research and development? It's an argumentative tone because the author is giving you one stance, saying, does it mean this is what's going to happen? And then the author is explaining. This is called argumentative tone. Argumentative tone of a passage is where the author gives you a stance and then explains why that stance is not correct. So argues against it, right? That's an argumentative tone. If there's only one stance, then you can't call it argumentative tone. In an argumentative tone, there need to be 2 stances, 2 different points of view, right? So one that the author doesn't agree with, and then the author's reasoning for why the author does not agree with it. Okay, this is a tired argument often raised to defend intellectual property laws, which means that the author is not a big fan of this particular argument that there would be less medical research and development if intellectual protection is removed, right? However, and we know this however is coming, right? It's a contrast marker. The author doesn't agree with it, so obviously there'll be a however, because the author is going to tell you something opposite of that. It has serious problems. What are serious problems? The tired argument has serious problems. The history, and this is something we can predict because we already know the author's stance. Okay, and which is why I pay so much stress on your being able to understand the author's mind, because when you understand where the author stands, all the arguments will make sense. It's like a conversation, right? If you already know your friend, you know what kind of arguments your friend's generally going to make, right? So, however, it has serious problems. The history of science shows that major scientific revolutions typically occur without such incentives. So, obviously, this is what the author is going to say. In the past, there were no intellectual property rights, and yet people did whatever they had to do, right? Copernicus, Newton, Darwin, Albert Einstein, if possible, avoid reading proper notes. You can see a bunch of proper notes, just jump, because there's no data in this kind of stuff, right? There's a bunch of names. So, but you'll be saving pronouncing difficult words once in a while, save about 10 to 12 words, okay? Anything you reduce. If you're reading at about 150, 175 words per minute, and in a 500 word passage, you probably avoided 50 to 60, 70 words. If you manage to avoid them, it's quite a good big deal, right? You're probably saving 20, 25 seconds, which is quite a lot, or adds up towards the end. So always be careful when you're reading a passage. Don't be body present, mind absent. Be aware of what you're reading, because you know what happens is sometimes you're seeing that it's going to come. Okay, the side view is going to tell you, okay, that I'm going to see stuff that I don't have the proper nouns, the university names, and some big long titles that you don't need to. You keep jumping over them. Anyways, breakthroughs in medicine are no different. So this is the elaboration of that. The most important breakthroughs in medical interventions, all these are important breakthroughs, okay, which is the inference, were developed in social and financial contexts that were completely unlike the context of pharmaceutical profit today. So the author is basically arguing that pharmaceutical profit did not really drive medical interventions in the past. So the argument that if intellectual property protection is removed, then innovation won't happen, that argument is crap, is what the author is saying. You have to also understand indirectly the author, you know, there's a minor inference here. See, they were developed in social and financial contexts that were completely unlike the context of pharmaceutical profit. So this term is indirectly getting connected. If you notice, this is one term, okay? Then there is one term here, innovative medical research. And then there is one term here, intellectual property protection. So all these connections you should be able to make. So pharmaceutical profit, intellectual property protection are connected. That's what's corrupting. Financial incentives, this is the other word. So if you notice, you know the theme of the whole argument, right? So there is an argument that intellectual property protection gives financial incentive for research. People invest in research so that they can make profit out of it. If you remove the intellectual property protection, they won't be able to profit out of it, because others also have the same knowledge, right? So that's the inference. So basically, if you remove it, the author is saying there is a fear that if the protection is not there, others might also benefit from research, and people don't like sharing their research. They want to benefit from it themselves, and therefore they'll stop investing in research, is the argument. The author does not agree with it. And what is the author using as proof for his or her disagreement? Whatever happened in the past, medical revolutions in the past did not have all this pharmaceutical problem. It happened, right? Insulin and antibiotics and polio and all of that. The author is saying, hey, these were the greatest breakthroughs in medical history, and there were no financial profit, and still happened. So those breakthroughs are indeed radically effective, unlike most of the blockbusters today. Okay, so the author is trying to make an argument saying that, hey, it's not going to really dent innovative medical research. That's something I wouldn't agree with, is what the author is saying. Another policy level change, okay, number two. First one is to reduce or eliminate intellectual property rights, isn't it? Second one is, another policy level change would be take the testing of new pharmaceuticals out of the hands of those who stand to profit from the same. The people who will benefit from the regulatory approval of a particular medicine, okay, those people should not be the ones testing it, is what the author is saying. That should be the policy. That if company A will get money if the medicine B is approved, then company A should not be testing. Someone who's not going to benefit from it should be doing the testing. The inherent assumption here made by the author is that the pharmaceutical companies which benefit from that medicine would obviously not be uh, honest, or would obviously not have the integrity to report failed testing. Okay, something like that. So saying no, rather give it to someone neutral, so that profit is not driving the integrity of the testing results, the test results, right? Number of commentators have argued that there should be independence between the organization that tests a new medical intervention and the organization that manufactures and sells that intervention. Now, if you notice, this long sentence of rather 20-25 words is just repetition of whatever we read here. The good reader already understands what's happening here in the previous sentence itself, which is what you aim to be as a reader. Okay, as a reader, you need to be a smart, you want to be someone smart. Okay, you want to know, understand things from the first sentence itself. So when you're reading the second sentence, you can just read fast, because the author is just elaborating. Authors do all the time. 500-word passes, probably only about 150 to 200 words are new information. The rest of it is just elaboration and repetition. Sometimes if it's an easy passage, it'll just be about 100 words of new information, or even 40-50 words of new information. That's why some passages can be done really fast with the 99 percentiles, right? You'll see when you watch them solve the passages. So watch out for that. Okay, if you understood it from the first sentence, the second sentence does not give you any new information, just repeating what the previous sentence is saying. This could contribute to raising the evidential standards to which we hold medical intervention, so that we can better learn the true benefits and harms. This is something you understand. So authors saying making an argument that, you know, the testing should be done by someone neutral, so that evidential standards can be raised. The evidence of the test holding, or the medicine actually working the way it's supposed to work, that the standard of that evidence should be high. Okay, this will contribute to raising the evidential standards to which we hold medical interventions, so that we can better learn their true benefits and harms, right? So that's the passage. You notice, right, the tone of the passage is obviously argumentative. The author is highly opinionated in this case, highly opinionated because the author has a very strong argument against pharmaceutical profit. The author is not anti innovation, but the author is anti intellectual property protection for innovation. The author is saying you have to be more open. Don't let some pharma companies take hold of all of it. Now, they're saying that there will still be innovative research, right? Argumentative style passage. Let's look at the question. Question number one. The author's argument about mitigated financial incentives in the third sentence of the first para is based on the assumption that, right, just to give you a refresher, what is the third sentence? This would have several consequences. It obviously mitigate the financial incentives that appear to be corrupting medical science. The author is making this statement on the basis of which assumption? Okay. What you can figure out the answer yourself without looking at the options is always a good idea. Whenever you can figure out the answer of a question without looking at the options, figure it out first, so that the options cannot confuse you. Go to the options only when you have to pick it from the option. For example, which of the following can be inferred? If that's a question, then there's no answer unless you look at the options. But in this case, what is the assumption? You can figure out what the assumption is from this sentence, and then go check which one matches your answer, right? So what is the assumption the author is making? The author is saying that this will mitigate the financial incentive that appear to be corrupting medical science. So the removal of intellectual property will reduce the financial incentive, according to the author. When will that be true? Assumption basically means something that has to be true for the argument to be true. That's an assumption. Assumption is that belief that makes the argument true, or that belief on which the argument is based. So if the sentence intellectual property protection removal reduces financial incentives, okay, if that has to be true, what should be true is the question that you are asking. Okay, the question that, so it will be true when companies are going through medical, or rather effecting medical interventions, or companies are investing in medical interventions to gain profit. Only if that is true, okay, then removing that intellectual property protection would discourage them from investing any more money. They're investing for profit. If I remove it, there won't be any financial incentive, right? So there is a financial incentive in the protection. So this would obviously mitigate the financial incentives. Okay, when will it mitigate the financial incentives? When you assume that they are doing this for profit. They're not doing it for fame. They are not doing it to help people. They're not doing it for social service. They are doing it for profit. Okay, that's actually not complicated logic, isn't it? The question sounds a little long and difficult. CR questions sometimes they look tougher than they actually are. Okay, if you understand the passage. Anyway, option A, medical interventions by firms are commercially motivated. This matches the assumption, right? So this is a good option. Keep it aside. The absence of intellectual property protection would scare away research in the medical field. Now, this is another option that you would want, you will be tempted to pick. Again, it looks very close. And this is what you have to ask. Is it true? Is it false? The absence of intellectual property protection would scare away research in the medical field. Probably true, right? Because it will reduce the financial incentive. But the question is not what does mitigated financial incentive mean, isn't it? This is the problem. This is what mitigated financial incentive means. Okay. The question is, this is based on which assumption? Okay. Why will it scare away research in the medical field? It will scare away research in the medical field because there is no profit. Okay, it's commercially driven. So B is true in the sense that that's what the author is arguing. The author is saying intellectual property protection might remove the financial incentive for some of these guys. Okay. But why? Why does the author say that? Because the author is saying medical interventions are commercially motivated. Okay. And then the author says, hey, does it really scare away research in the medical field? He's like, no, innovation is anyway happening. In the past, it has happened. And the author goes on to that kind of argument, right? So B, if you break it that level, you'll realize that B is not the assumption, right? Then medical interventions can only be funded by expensive drugs. This only is one big clue for you all the time, right? It's an extreme option. It can only be funded by expensive drugs. Did we talk about expensive drugs and cheap drugs? No, this is an alien, what you call an alien option. Okay, this we did not discuss at all. It can be funded by drugs that can be sold by them and then make money. That's all we've discussed. We never got to the point where we discussed some drugs are expensive, some drugs are cheap, right? So C is very easy to eliminate. Innovative medical research costs a lot of money. At it cost. Okay. We never discussed how much money it costs. We only discussing the point that people, it removes intellectual property right removal will remove the financial incentive, meaning intellectual property right gives financial incentive, meaning people want those rights because they want to make profit. That's how it works, right? Whether it costs a lot of money or doesn't cost a lot of money, either ways, option D could be anything, right? It could cost a lot of money, it would cost less money. The argument about financial incentive being reduced by removing intellectual property right would still hold. So it doesn't depend on option D. Easy way of testing it is, if the option is false, the argument should become false. For example, medical interventions by firms are not commercially motivated. If it's not commercially motivated, then why will it mitigate financial incentive? It won't, obviously, right? So A is just in other way, just telling you why. Why did the author say mitigated financial incentive, right? So it's a rather easy question. If you just get to the point where you understand the sentence, it's all there is. It's not such a deep hidden assumption. Also, it's just almost on the surface. Some assumptions can go really deep, but this one's not. It's just there on the surface, almost there in the passage. So assumption generally should not be mentioned directly, but then some are very crookedly mentioned, some are on the surface almost. You can almost see what the assumption is. But it says financial incentive, mitigated financial incentive, meaning whatever they're doing is commercially motivated. Just a small assumption. Right? So the answer to this particular question is option A. So the next question, the tired argument mentioned in the 7th sentence of the first para is not weakened by which of the following? What was the tired argument? The tired argument was this part, right? There would be less innovative medical research and development. That's the tired argument. Okay. Does the author agree with it? The author does not agree with it, right? Now, this is what you need to learn, okay, as a good reader. The question says, is not weakened by which of the following, meaning one of them does not weaken, the other three weaken. The author is also against the tired argument, which means 3 sentences should agree with the author. Your answer is the one statement that does not directly agree with the author, meaning 3 of the 4 options should say that there can still be research without the intellectual property rights, without the financial gains. 3 should say that. The one that's not saying it is your answer. Okay, you have to form this relationship before you get into the options, so that the options don't confuse the hell out of you. Okay, so option A, the current context of pharmaceutical profit does not encourage medical revolutions. The current context does not encourage medical revolutions. Fair enough. But what was the tired argument? The tired argument is about intellectual property rights. The tired argument is that intellectual property right removal will not support innovative research. Okay, so the argument is about what happens in the absence of intellectual property rights. A is not talking about it at all, isn't it? A is just talking about something else randomly. So you know that this is a very good candidate for your answer. Keep it aside. Look at B. Innovation is more often spearheaded by inquisitive thinkers than money-minded pragmatists. Without money also, there can be innovation, which means it agrees with the author. On tone, you can eliminate this option, isn't it? That B actually is weakening the tired argument, isn't it? Because B agrees with the author, and the author was speaking against the tired argument. C, medical research is driven by a crisis rather than the possible financial and intellectual property. Same thing again. So the tired argument is weakened again, because C is saying it's not the money, the innovation is because of the crisis, like Corona, for example, COVID, for example, something like that is called a crisis, right? So C is also saying, C also agrees with the author and thereby disagrees with the tired argument. Innovators are driven by the lure of fame more than the lure of owning the rights to the innovation. Again, money is not important, fame is important. If fame is important, then I don't care about the intellectual property rights. As long as somebody says, hey, this is the guy who found this, but this particular solution is available to everybody to manufacture medicines, I'm still famous, right? So have to be a little careful. D sounds very close, and some of you would have fallen for D, okay? Fallen for D because this lure of fame sounds a little different. You have to ask, what made me go for option D? Especially if you fell for D, it means you did not think through the option, okay? Sometimes what happens, you're too tired by the end of the options, and then you're like, this looks okay, and you mark it and move on. Don't, okay? Don't give up. If you're too tired, don't mark the answer, don't get a negative, but never mark an answer when you're too tired to understand the option, okay? When you don't fully understand the option, don't go for the answer. Innovators are driven by the lure of fame. As far as you're concerned, option D can easily be eliminated on the basis of a simple point, that owning the rights is not, innovation is happening without owning the rights, okay? That's all you need. That weakens, that agrees with the author, and that weakens the tired argument. Is that clear? Does that make sense? So the answer to this particular question will be option A. Current context does not encourage medical revolutions. Now, current context, what does that mean? The current context has protection, does not have protection. Let's say you assume that current context is equal to where there is protection, okay? Because the authors, the policy level change is about removing the protection. So let's say we think in that direction. The current context is equal to protection of intellectual property. The laws agree, the laws there, okay? So when there are intellectual property rights, okay, the current context of pharmaceutical profit does not encourage medical revolutions, which means if we remove it, then there will be medical revolution, okay? Now you may think like that. You may say, hey, current context means that there is intellectual property right, and it is not supporting medical revolutions. So you have to go a little further and then assume that if I remove the intellectual property right, then it will support the medical revolution. It's an assumption you as a reader will be making. Only when you think like that, A will not feel like the answer, and you'll say, okay, if I remove it, then it will encourage medical revolution, which means that it is against a tired argument that there won't be any research, but there will be research if I remove it. But you have to make those long assumptions, saying first assumption you're making is current context is equal to intellectual property rights exist, okay, which is not the argument at all. The tired argument is that, if you notice the wording of the tired argument, what does it exactly say? There would be less innovative medical research and development if intellectual property protection is removed. That's the argument. That's all we are talking about, okay? So current context of pharmaceutical profit does not equate to intellectual property rights exist, and their intellectual property rights are the ones which are not encouraging medical revolutions. It does not equate to that. Secondly, even if that were true, even if I take current context is equal to intellectual property rights exist, even if I take that, removing it will encourage medical revolutions is not true, okay? For example, if I pray it rains, let's say I make a statement like that, if I pray it rains, and someone says that statement is not true, then if I don't pray, then it won't rain is not necessarily true. The opposite is not necessarily true, okay? It's called deformation of consequence. You do not, if statement A is true, the reverse is true is not something that you can assume. So intellectual property rights don't encourage medical revolutions. If you falsify the statement, it does not necessarily mean the removal of them will encourage medical revolution. So you can, A is twisted. That's why A does not directly weaken it. Okay, makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Because BCD are way too direct, isn't it? That's the other thing. BCD directly agree with the author. Done. Next, which of the following, if true, does not repudiate the argument presented by the author in the second paragraph? Does not weaken, repudiate, or refute, or weaken, or invalidate. All these are one bunch of words. Which of the following does not repudiate, does not weaken the argument presented by the author in the second paragraph? So it should go against what the author is saying. So what's the author saying in the second paragraph? The author says testing should be taken away from the hands of the people who stand to benefit from the products, right? From the medicines. So which of the following, if true, does not repudiate the repudiate? So one of them will not repudiate, three of them are repudiating, right? So pharmaceutical firms face grave consequences in the event of misleading test results, meaning pharmaceutical. So even if you don't remove it from their hands, it's still okay. right? Which means it disagrees with the author, right? Author is saying it should be removed from the hands of the pharmaceutical companies which are benefiting. So basically, pharmaceutical company is testing their own product, they are benefiting from it, so the testing won't have its integrity, it should be removed from their hands, is what the author is saying. What does A say? If they don't do the test properly, they're in trouble. Okay, which means that even if it's in their hands, not a big problem. So A disagrees with the author. So it does repudiate the argument presented by the author, right? Regulatory frameworks established by governments ensure pharmaceutical testing adheres to stringent standards, right? So even now there are regulatory frameworks which are established by governments. They ensure pharmaceutical testing adheres to stringent standards. Okay, they are there to see that this is going, and so nothing needs to change, right? So B is also okay. B is also going against the author. B is saying no need, we don't need policy change because the regulatory frameworks established by governments are ensuring, okay, are doing their job. Next, the benefits from new pharmaceuticals as reported by their manufacturers must be reproduced across multiple phases of testing. Okay, now this one does not say whether the policy should be there, should not be there. It's saying the benefits of from new pharmaceuticals as reported by their manufacturers, they must be reproduced across multiple phases of testing. Doesn't tell you whether they're doing a good job or a bad job, doesn't tell you whether there's something looking at, because they only have to reproduce across multiple phases. They could reproduce it if if they want to. So irrespective of whether they're honest, the pharmaceutical companies, or they're dishonest, C is still true. Okay, C being true does not really affect the author's argument in any way. It does not tell you that pharmaceutical companies have to do a good job. It does not tell you that pharmaceutical companies don't have to do a good job. It's just irrelevant, isn't it? D, evidential standards for new pharmaceuticals are controlled by regulatory authorities, free from the lobbying influence of pharmaceutical giants. This is the other thing that you need to watch out for. So evidential standards are controlled by regulatory authorities, very similar to this. Regulatory frameworks, they ensure that stringent standards are adhered to, and they are free from the lobbying influence of, so pharmaceutical giants cannot really affect them. Okay, similarly these established by governments, which means they're neutral, right? This part. So B and D are almost same to same, mirror reflections of each other. And then there is this grave consequence to pharmaceutical firms. If they, so you can see how A, B, D are indirectly saying pharmaceutical companies can't get away with bad testing. C does not tell you whether they can get away or do not get away, right? So C does not repudiate the author's argument. A, B, D are all saying, hey, you are asking for a policy change because you think that the pharmaceutical companies don't do testing properly, but A, B, D tell us that they can't get away with it. Okay, only C doesn't. So the answer to this particular question will be option C. Okay, that brings us to the end of this particular passage. Hope we learned a little bit. Okay, I know deliberately made the questions CR heavy, and you should also remember that CR is actually a little tricky. Okay, even for the best of teachers, even for the really sharp minds, there'll always be that small problem. So feel free to argue. Okay, whatever I'm explaining here is neither rocket science nor something written in stone, not a scripture per se, right? There could be something out of this also. So feel free to leave a comment if you think something, but listen to the video before you leave a comment. Okay, because when you leave a comment, I'll have to go back and watch the video again, and if I've already explained the doubt that you're asking and then you make me watch the whole thing all over again, it's a little unfair. Okay, please take care of that. Okay, until next time, peace out.